Hello and welcome history buffs, my name is Nick Hodges and we'll be going back in time to medieval France. We'll be taking a look at Timeline. For those of you who haven't seen Timeline, it's a film based on a Michael Crichton book about a group of archaeologists who travel back to 14th century France. Their mission is to find and rescue their college professor who is trapped during the 100 Years' War. So you might be asking, why am I reviewing a science fiction time travel movie that is clearly not based on real historical events? Well, there's a reason for that. A lot of people criticize time travel movies for scientific reasons, such as the butterfly effect or the grandfather paradox. Those are all well and good, but nobody ever takes the time to consider the historical angle. For example, I don't know if any of you have seen that time travel show Timeless, but it has a really stupid scene where they decide who should be the pilot for the time machine.
Do you need to go with them? I can't. I am black. There's literally no place in American history that'll be awesome for me.
But despite his perfectly valid reason for not wanting to go, they send him anyway, and yeah, it turns out exactly how you expected. I mean, look, I'm all up for diversity in the workplace, but I think it's irresponsible to send a black man to 1937 America. So anyway, why am I mentioning this? Because this movie suffers from some of the same problems as Timeless. It fails to consider what life was actually like during the Middle Ages. The way things are presented are not only scientifically improbable, it's historically impossible. This is Timeline. So the movie is centered around a college professor called Edward Johnston, played by Billy Connolly. He is leading his team of students at a dig site in the village of Castlegarde, near Laroque Castle in southern France. Now, if the name Castlegarde doesn't sound familiar to you, there's a very good reason for that, but we'll get to it later. Anyway, before even 5 minutes into the movie, Timeline is already guilty of its first inaccuracy.
Listen up, class. April 4th, 1357, Castlegarde, France. The English army in the nice red uniforms.
I don't know which shitty university made this guy a professor, but he needs to relearn some of the history he's teaching. The English army wouldn't adopt the red uniform until the 17th century. As for the French, they wouldn't adopt the blue uniform until the 18th century. You'd think a college professor who specializes in the Middle Ages would know that armies at this time didn't wear standardized uniforms. Each knight had their own colors and standards, and every man-at-arms would wear pretty much whatever he could afford. Now, I know the reason that the movie does it this way is so we can tell who's who on the battlefield, but just for once, I would love it if a medieval movie would get it right and not dumb things down to a simple red versus blue. Anyway, we see the so-called professor speak to his son Paul Walker about his suspicions of the corporation sponsoring their dig.
Dorniger's been giving us too many tips, you know.
He's a lucky zillionaire, Pops.
Nobody's that lucky, not even me. He knows something he's not saying.
As a result of this conversation, the professor flies off to New Mexico to find out what's been going on. Whilst he's gone, we see his team of archaeologists exploring the ruins of a monastery. It is there that they find an ancient note and a bifocal lens. They find this particularly odd since the monastery's been sealed up for 600 years, with one of the characters correctly pointing out that bifocals weren't even invented until the 1700s. But the real mystery for the group is when they discover that the note is written in the professor's handwriting, simply reading, "Help me, 2nd of April, 1357.
It's definitely his handwriting. But he's only been gone for 2 days. I mean, your father wrote that, but he wrote it 600 years ago.
This leads a suspicious Paul Walker to call up their sponsors at the ITC Corporation, demanding to know the whereabouts of his father. It's only when he threatens to call the police that they send a plane out to fly the archaeologists to New Mexico. The group then learns, rather randomly, that the ITC Corporation has been quietly developing teleportation technology, and in doing so, accidentally invented time travel.
So wait, what you're saying is that you accidentally discovered time travel?
No, Mr. Stern, we accidentally discovered a wormhole. A wormhole that seems to be locked to a single time and place in the past. 1357, Castlegarde.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. I still don't understand how that doesn't qualify as time travel. I mean, like, what difference does it make whether you use a DeLorean, a TARDIS, or a wormhole? If you're still traveling back in time, why does the method of transport dictate what you call— oh, fuck it. Anyway, the text of the ITC admit that when Professor Johnston was told about their quote-unquote wormhole machine— no, but God, I missed that show. Basically, Johnston insisted on using it to go back in time, and in doing so, got separated from the group he was with and was left behind. So it's up to our heroes to kit up and go back to 14th century southern France. As they are the leading experts in their field, they will be able to use their invaluable knowledge of the period to find the professor Except for him and him. Paul Walker's completely useless in this movie because he isn't an archaeologist. I mean, hell, he doesn't even like history.
I understand you guys, you all live in the past. I mean, none of you archaeologists looks to the future.
Then they wouldn't be archaeologists then, you fucking idiots. So, yeah, their rules don't matter as anything except a liability. And the only reason he's going is because he's the professor's son. As for this guy, check out their reason for bringing him along.
But we are going to need you, Francois.
Oh, wait. Why do we need him?
Because he speaks French fluently.
I hope when you say French you mean Occitan, because your 21st century French is going to count for bugger all back in the 14th century. What do I mean by this? Well, basically, Occitan was a language spoken in southern France at this time. It was a combination between Middle French and Latin, which means he's not going to be able to speak, let alone understand what's being said to him, making Mr. Fast and Furious over here just as qualified as an interpreter. And yet, despite everything I just said, they bring them both anyway. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, almost immediately when they step through the time machine, they get attacked by English soldiers. At least I assume they are, but I'm quite certain that an English knight wouldn't be sporting a yellow shield with a black eagle on it. And it's because this coat of arms was synonymous with the Holy Roman Empire. Therefore, I can think of no reason an English knight would be carrying such a shield, other than the costume department for Timeline just don't give a shit.
The work I normally do is based on a historical truth, although adapted for film purposes, because we're not making a documentary, we are making a story. But in this particular case, Richard Donner did ask for it to look real.
Well, Jenny, you failed. Anyway, back to the plot. It turns out that one of the American Marines sent to protect the archaeologists snuck in a grenade. He gets shot by an archer, and then he sends himself back to the present and accidentally destroys the time machine. Now, I must admit that I'm a little confused by this scene because we see this archer firing a longbow on horseback. And I always thought that this was impossible to do because they're like 6 feet long and have a draw weight of over 100 pounds. From what I researched, there were mounted archers in the English army, but they always dismounted first before firing, probably because they were much more effective that way on foot. I'm not sure whether to chalk this up as an inaccuracy though, but I would love to read your comments on this. Also, I just gotta ask, why did that guy only bring a grenade? I mean, I know he's not supposed to have one, but why only a grenade?
What about protection, weapons?
Nothing modern goes bad, especially weapons.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I could think of far more effective weapons to sneak in than a disposable hand grenade, and many of which would have resulted in a better movie. So sometime later, Paul Walker and his buddies get captured by the English and brought before Lord Oliver, presenting us with one of the most appallingly inaccurate scenes I've ever seen in a movie.
I'm Lord Oliver.
Who speaks for you? I do, my lord.
You speak strangely.
Yes, we are Scottish, my lord.
Scottish? You've come to kill us all in our beds, eh?
I can't believe I need to bring up the language barrier again, but the ease of this conversation is just impossible. Languages evolve over time, and Gerard Butler is 600 years ahead to this Lord Oliver guy. The English spoken in 1357 wouldn't be remotely similar to our modern day usage of the language. Lord Oliver should be speaking Middle English, the next phase after the Anglo-Saxons' Old English, and it sounded nothing like our modern English. The spelling was weird, the pronunciation was weird, words had completely different meanings or no longer even exist. To get an idea of just how alien Lord Oliver's English might have sounded, all you have to do is listen to a few lines from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales.
One that April with his sure suchte the drucht of March hath persed to the rota, and bather every vine in switch liqueur of which vertu engendered is the floor.
I should also mention that Lord Oliver wouldn't believe that Gerard Butler was Scottish either. He should be speaking Norn if he's from the northern coast, Gaelic if he's from the Highlands, or Scots if he's from the lowlands, all of which had sounds and features nothing like the modern Scottish English accent Gerard Butler is speaking with. Now you might be asking yourself, hey wait a minute, isn't this all based in the book? How do they get over the language barrier on that? Well, in the book it actually explains that the time travelers are wearing discreet translators tucked away in their ears, that is translating what is being said to them. But before they leave for their trip, the archaeologists listen to audio tapes that contain the correct pronunciation for the languages spoken at the time. And since these archaeologists are already familiar with them due to their field, they pick it up very quickly. So that's all I need for an explanation. Is it really that hard to show any of this?
Nobody will ever notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details, it's about the big picture.
So you think that would be it for the scene, but the more you analyze it, the more you realize how unbelievably stupid this movie is. For example, why did this mouth-breathing moron admit to Lord Oliver that he's Scottish? If Gerard Butler is really an expert in the Middle Ages, then surely he would know that by April 1357, England was still at war with Scotland, and figuring how he and his mates were just captured skulking around the estate, this might be seen as a little suspicious.
Who are you? Yes, you, the one whose head is touching the ceiling.
François, my lord.
A Frenchman.
A Frenchman? In France? Who would have thought?
Forgive them. I am at war with the French, as well as the Scottish. Have I forgotten anyone? The Spaniards am I at war with them?
I don't know, Oliver. Which specific ones are you referring to? The ones from Castile and Leon? Aragon? Navarre? Which fucking Spaniards are you talking about?
No, he's not a spy.
No?
He's our friend.
I'm sure he is. He's too tall to be a spy, anyway. Je suis un espion. Interpret.
Je suis un espion. How about you interpret this, douchebag? Je suis plein de merde. Because that's what you are. You're trying to justify killing Francois by forcing him to say, I am a spy, just because he's French, which is kind of hypocritical coming from an English nobleman during the 100 Years' War. Remember what I said earlier about Lord Oliver only speaking Middle English? Well, scrap that. It's far more likely that he mostly spoke Middle French, or I guess you could also call it Anglo-Norman French, since the English aristocracy at the time were descended from the Normans, and French was the official language of the English court. What the movie clearly doesn't get is what the 100 Years' War was all about. This wasn't so much a war between nations as it was a war between dynasties, between competing royal families fighting for their right to rule. So I find it ridiculous that Lord Oliver kills Francois for being French when you could also argue he is French. Anyway, after Francois' death, the group is imprisoned by Lord Oliver. It is then they are reunited with the Professor and they begin to plot their escape by passing through the shittest thatched roof I've ever seen. How on earth is that supposed to keep the rain out?
What do you know? Haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief?
I'm starting to see a pattern with this movie. So the team splits up when Gerard Butler decides to stay behind to rescue this French noblewoman he met at the river earlier. The two make a run for it and head for the river, leaving the rest of the group behind. Grateful that she's been rescued and returned to the French, Lady Claire thanks her rescuer with a kiss. Now, not to sound like an utter prude, because she is drop-dead gorgeous, but that would have made me flinch just a little bit. And that's because there's a serious risk of health issues for both parties. Disease was everywhere in the 1300s and included everything from leprosy, smallpox and measles to, only just recently, there was the Black Death. In fact, it has only been several years since the outbreak officially ended, but still I wouldn't want to chance it by making out with a girl I just met from that time period. I mean, hot or not, it's bubonic plague. But I should also point out that kissing Gerard Butler presents a health concern to Lady Claire as well. For example, if Gerard Butler had something as simple as the common cold from the 21st century, it's possible that Lady Claire's immune system simply wouldn't have been equipped to handle it. It's a bit of a buzzkill for a romantic subplot, I know, but no one ever considers this for a time travel movie. So in the interest of time and my sanity, I'm going to stop focusing on the plot as much and instead go over some historical inaccuracies. And let's be honest here, this is the real reason why you're watching this video. Let's begin by taking a look at the movie's big battle scene, the Battle of Castleguard. If you can't remember any details about this battle from the 100 Years' War, it's because it never happened. There was no Battle of Castleguard, there never even existed a village called Castleguard. There was a Larrow Castle, but it looks nothing like what you see in the movie. While we're on the topic of things that didn't exist, we can add Lady Claire to that as well. Her character is clearly inspired by Joan of Arc, since her death is supposed to anger the French and motivate them to win the battle. Now, I can't exactly nitpick a fictional battle that never happened, but I can pick apart how that battle is fought. For example, it's completely inaccurate to see French archers armed with longbows. I mean, this is clearly evidence of a lazy prop department. The longbow is arguably the most recognizable weapon during the 100 Years' War, made famous of course during the Battle of Crécy and Agincourt, and most of us know enough to remember that longbows were used exclusively by the English and Welsh. The French would have been using mostly crossbows and short bows, and neither of which could match the longbow's distance. Which brings me to my next point. Now, I'm willing to admit that I've never mentioned this before in previous reviews, but this film is guilty of a stupid cliche that's been circulating in historical movies forever, and I'm finally going to moan about it. I'm sick to death of bloody fire arrows. There is very little evidence at all for them being used in battle. Ask any historian of medieval history and they'll tell you that the idea of setting your arrows on fire is fraught with problems. Wrapping an arrow's tip in cloth and setting it on fire would dramatically hinder its effectiveness as a long-range weapon due to the extra weight. Not to mention how often the speed of an arrow alone distinguishes the flame. If it does manage to stay lit, it doesn't automatically set things on fire. Most likely it will sit in the ground and just burn itself out. Also, why would you want to advertise to the enemy where your volley is coming from? Isn't it simply much more effective to do this?
Night arrows! Night arrows! A little surprise for the French.
Ready!
Stretch!
Strike! Away!
I love how he calls them night arrows. Like, they use fire arrows so much they have to differentiate between them and regular arrows. There's also this inaccurate subplot where Professor Johnston offers to make Greek fire for the English in order that he and his comrades be spared, much to their disapproval, of course.
Sorry, have you considered what you might have done here? I mean, you've just given the English a serious advantage in this battle, and they're supposed to lose.
Now, while I admit that seeing Greek fire in action is very cool, it still doesn't stop me from asking, how does he know how to make it? Because it's one of the Byzantine Empire's greatest weapons. What was famous about it was that it was an incendiary device that would continue to burn even when doused with water. But the method of making it was such a closely guarded secret that's been lost to time. To this very day, we still don't know its exact chemical composition, and we have theories, but nothing substantial. So either Professor Johnston rediscovered it prior to his trip to the past, or he just pulled it out of his arse. So yeah, let's wrap this movie up because I'm done with it. The French troops storm the castle and win the day without siege ladders or a battering ram. God, this movie sucks. The time machine is fixed, allowing Paul Walker and the others to return to the 21st century. However, Gerard Butler decides to stay behind and live out his life with Lady Claire. Once the gang makes it back to modern-day France, they discover writing on a sarcophagus that reveals it was for Lady Claire and Gerard Butler who died in 1382. So that was Timeline, and needless to say, it's about as accurate a piece of medieval history as Space Jam's a documentary on basketball. The whole purpose of a time travel movie is to immerse the audience into the past, and it fails at doing exactly that. No effort was made to make me truly believe in what I was watching, and I think general movie-going audiences who know nothing about history could pick up on that, which is why it comes across less like a Hollywood blockbuster and more like a made-for-TV sci-fi film. It also wasn't just film critics and historians who destroyed Timeline. Michael Crichton hated it as well, so much so that he refused to license any more of his novels to movie studios whilst he was alive. What I would recommend to do instead is that you pick up the book the movie is based on. Then you will get the real time travel adventure this movie should have been, with all scientific and historical concerns addressed. Well, that about wraps it up. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching, History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. If you wish to support History Buffs, then you can now do so at Patreon. And as always, let me know in the comment section what you thought about Timeline. And of course, what historical movie should I review next? In the meantime, check out the History Buffs Twitter and Facebook pages for new updates. Until then, I'll see you next time.